Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Since the Senate enjoys an approval rating of about 12%, that is so nice to hear. Thank you so much. Lorraine, thank you for the nice introduction. NALEO, Lucille, your dad would be so proud to see this audience today. A little organization which he dreamed of has become a major national political force, a bipartisan force. I want to thank Senator Alex Padilla, we met earlier, and your wife, who has joined us for lunch, and Arturo Vargas, who was here earlier as well. I want to thank all of the staff. There are a number of people from Illinois, and I run the risk of missing a few names, but I'm going to try anyway. The Cook County Assessor Joe Barrios is here. State Senator Tony Munoz is here. State Representative Tony Barrios is here. Cook County Commissioner Eddie Reyes is here. I saw Iris Martinez, Rick Munoz, alderman from the city of Chicago, and I don't know if Chuy Garcia is here, but he was the first Mexican-American ever elected to the state Senate, and he served with a fellow named Barack Obama in the state Senate, and he is receiving an award today from the government of Mexico for the good work that he has done in Illinois. We couldn't be prouder. But before I go any further mentioning people from Illinois, I want to thank you. I want to thank NALEO. You did me a great favor, and you didn't even know it. It was 20 years ago, and you gave summer scholarships to two young people from Chicago, and they went out to a NALEO conference in Las Vegas. One of them was thinking that he wanted to be a journalist. The other one, a young lady, thought she wanted to be an engineer. But when they met one another, something else happened. They decided they wanted to be married. Omar Duque is president and CEO of the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And you can be proud that that internship led to that position in the city of Chicago. But even prouder still that he married Clarisol Avila Duque, who is my chief of staff in my Chicago office. So NALEO interns have risen in the ranks to lead. Luis Gutierrez, a singular, strong, maybe the strongest voice in America for comprehensive immigration reform. I see him everywhere. He travels this country far and wide. He's headed to Washington tonight, to Nevada on Monday. I don't know where else, but his itinerary takes him all around the nation as he tries to fire up the interest in every state and community. He made a singular political sacrifice that as fellow politicians we can appreciate. He walked away from 20 years seniority on the House Banking Committee this year to start off as a freshman on the House Judiciary Committee. Why? He wanted to be there for the immigration reform bill. We are so fortunate to have a person this committed, this determined, this energetic on our side to make sure that comprehensive immigration reform becomes the law of the land. Luis Gutierrez, thank you again and again for all that you've done. It's an anniversary today which we might forget, maybe we want to forget, but we shouldn't. It was 6 years ago today, 6 years ago, that the last comprehensive immigration reform bill died in the United States Senate. 6 years. It took us that long to come back. But this week in Washington, we proved something. We proved that Democrats and Republicans can come together just as they do in NALEO. We proved that Democrats and Republicans can come together and, if they work hard enough, create a compromise, comprehensive immigration reform bill that can pass with an overwhelming majority in the United States Senate. We did it because 8 of us sat down starting in December, working through all of the details. What a group. You take a look at it and you say, they'll never agree on anything. John McCain and Dick Durbin, go figure. Chuck Schumer, Marco Rubio, Bob Menendez, Jeff Flake, Michael Bennet, Lindsey Graham, And I will tell you, we did not only create a bill, we created a bond of friendship and trust. We had 40 different sessions where we sat down and hammered out one section after another, month after month, until we finally produced this bill. Then we sent it to the Senate Judiciary Committee. We faced 301 amendments, many of them not friendly at all, amendments designed to kill the bill. We adopted, at the end of a week, 140 amendments, 40 of which had been offered by Republican senators. All but 2 of the amendments passed in a bipartisan fashion. We were gaining momentum and came to the Senate floor. We had just enough votes to pass it. All 54 Democratic senators, and we could count 6 Republicans. But we didn't think that would be enough. So we sat down and negotiated again. Bob Corker of Tennessee, John Hoeven, North Dakota, they authored an amendment for stronger border enforcement. It was an amendment which was controversial. If you ask me, it's too much. I think it's overkill. But on the Republican side, it was essential. We had to have it. And we got it. We passed that amendment with an overwhelming vote, and we picked up 8 more Republican senators, including my colleague from the state of Illinois, Mark Kirk, who for the first time came out for comprehensive immigration reform as long as this border enforcement provision was included. And then when the roll call came up on Thursday, you were watching, many of you, and you know what happened. It was one of those rare moments in the Senate. The Majority Leader, Harry Reid, strongly committed to the DREAM Act, strongly committed to comprehensive immigration reform. He said, "We will not take this vote until every senator is in his seat." We don't do that very often. Could count on one hand the time that it's happened. We all sat there and waited for our names to be called and stood at our desks to announce our votes. This was an historic moment. And when it was finally calculated, 68 senators, 14 Republicans, and 54 Democrats voted for comprehensive immigration reform. I looked at the galleries. They were filled. There was not an empty seat in the Senate galleries. That's rare. Half of those seats were filled by a group special to me. Because you see, it was 12 years ago that I introduced the DREAM Act, a bill which was introduced on behalf of a Korean girl here in the city of Chicago. Her name is Teresa Lee. She came here at the age of 2. Her mother never filed any papers. They were raised in a very poor family. Her father wanted to be an evangelical minister, but never, ever opened a church. So he stayed at home and prayed. Her mom went to work at a dry cleaners, which if you know the dry cleaners in Chicago, the Korean families are the ones that run most. Mom worked, father prayed, and the kids barely got by. Teresa went to a public high school here. She remembers the days when she had to wait until the end of the lunch hour to look and see what her fellow students had thrown away in the wastebasket and find something to eat. That's how bad it was. But she had a chance, signed up for something called the Merit Music Program, and turned out to be an accomplished pianist. She was the star pupil. She was accepted at Juilliard School of Music in New York and the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. And when she went to fill out the application, said to her mom, "What do I put down here for citizenship, nationality?" Her mom said, "I don't know. We never filed any papers for you. What are we going to do?" "Well, we're going to call Durbin's office." And they reached a young staffer of mine who I mentioned before, Claudia Salduque. And we looked at the law and found out the law was clear, and the law was cruel. The law said, "Teresa Lee, you have to leave America for 10 years and petition to come back." She's 17 years old. It didn't sound right to me. I introduced the DREAM Act, and year after year, worked to get it passed. You know the Dreamers, don't you? You've met them. But there was a time when being a dreamer was something that was kept secret. I used to give speeches about the DREAM Act to groups that I thought would be very receptive, and they would sit there very quietly, applaud a little bit, and that was it. But then I would go out to my car in the dark here in the city of Chicago, and I would find somebody waiting by my car, usually a young girl. And she'd look over her shoulder in both directions to make sure no one was near. And she'd say to me in a low voice, "Senator Durbin, I'm a dreamer. My sister is a dreamer. We're counting on you." My friends in elective office, you will never forget that kind of appeal. You go home and you think about it every night. They're counting on you. Well, we kept calling this bill in the Senate and falling short. Luis passed it in the House of Representatives thanks to Speaker Pelosi, but we could never get that over that hump when it came to the Republican filibuster. It was 2.5 years ago we called that bill. We got 55 votes out of 100. That usually is a winning margin, but not in the Senate. You need 60. We had the galleries filled with dreamers in their caps and gowns, and they filed out with their heads down. I met with them. They were crying. They said, "What are we going to do?" And I told them something. I said, "I'm never going to give up on you. Don't you give up on me, and don't you give up on this country. We can do this, and we're going to do this." And this week, we proved that we could do it in the Senate. Over this period of time, these dreamers no longer wait in the darkness to whisper. They stand up. They introduce themselves. They tell you who they are. They do exactly what their parents told them to never do. Never tell anyone that you have no documents. Never tell anyone you're here illegally. They can deport you. But every time in America, when we've faced a civil rights issue or a human rights issue, you know what's happened. It's been the young people, the students. They're the ones who bring the energy, the commitment, the idealism to these efforts, and they have time and again, not just for the DREAM Act, but for comprehensive immigration reform. This last Thursday, when I looked up in the galleries, half the galleries were filled with dreamers from all over the United States, waiting for this vote. And Joe Biden, the vice president who came up for this important vote, he admonished them ahead of time now. He said, "Now, when the vote is announced, we don't want to hear any response from the galleries." Didn't do any good. As soon as the vote was announced, they started cheering, and they had to be calmed down. But you can imagine how they felt. This was their chance. This was their moment. Now, as we say to my friend Luis and Lucille, we are passing the baton, passing it over to the House of Representatives with the confidence that your courage and your energy and your commitment will make the difference in terms of passing a bipartisan bill. We have to say to the Speaker, you do have a Republican majority, but this is not a Republican or Democratic issue. This is an American issue. Let's have an American vote in the U.S. House of Representatives. Let's call for both parties to stand up and vote. I want to mention one other issue to you. With all of the good news of Thursday, sadly, there was some bad news on Tuesday. And I'm referring to the decision that was reached by the Supreme Court of the United States when it comes to the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court's decision to gut Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act really is problematic for all of America, but especially for those represented here today. The court's decision was an overreach. It ignores an almost unanimous vote in Congress to create this version of the Voting Rights Act. It ignores the records that we have put together before we reauthorized the Act just 7 years ago. 21 hearings, 15,000 pages of documentation show that we need the Voting Rights Act. And there's something else the court ignored. It ignored all of the new laws that are showing up in your states, and you know what I'm talking about, over the last 2 or 3 years to limit the opportunity of Americans to vote. Think of that. At a time when we celebrate this citizenship that we own, when we celebrate this country, there have been efforts in states all across the nation to limit the right to vote for the poor, for the elderly, for African Americans, and yes, for the Latinos. If anyone wonders what the Supreme Court's dismantling of the Voting Rights Act means for Latino voters, think about this. Within hours of the court's ruling, the state of Texas announced it would immediately begin enforcing 2 measures that had been blocked under the Voting Rights Act. One of those is a 2011 voter ID law blocked by the federal government, by the federal courts. And why was it blocked? According to Texas' own data, nearly 800,000 registered voters in that state including nearly 40% of registered Latino voters, do not own the type of ID required under Texas law. The other measure is a 2011 Texas redistricting plan that carved up the districts held by Latinos and protected those held by Anglos. That plan was blocked by a federal court, and here's what they said in the opinion. They have provided more evidence of discriminatory intent than we have space or need to address in this opinion. That is how bad it was. MALDEF estimates that 32% of Latinos in the United States live in jurisdictions covered by the Voting Rights Act, Section 5. According to a study released last fall by the Advancement Project, 10 million Latino voters could be adversely affected by new barriers to voting enacted by 20 states. How do we protect the rights of those voters without a Voting Rights Act? There's a group called ALEC, the American Legislative Education Council. They've been at work for a number of years. They are funded by major corporations in the United States. Many corporations which tell you they're your friends are also funding ALEC in their efforts to limit your right to vote in states across the United States. They have all kinds of model legislation they've introduced in legislatures on workers' rights, consumer rights, voting rights, immigrant rights. This is the same outfit that drafted Arizona's Show Me Your Papers immigration law, SB 1070, also overturned by a federal court. It's the same outfit that pushed Florida's Stand Your Ground law as a model law and helped to get more than 20 other states to pass it. I've decided not to read the names of the many corporations that sponsor the efforts of ALEC, but I invite you as an organization to find those names and ask those companies, whose side are you going to be on when it comes to the voting rights of America? When the Dreamers came out, stood up, announced who they were, I started coming to the Senate floor and telling their stories. Big color photographs of these dreamers from all across America. Some of you who suffer from insomnia and watch C-SPAN may realize that the Senate floor is often empty, and when people speak, occasionally even the presiding officer is dozing off or looking up into the heavens. That never happened when I came and gave those dreamer speeches. Everybody, the pages, the staff, would stop what they were doing and focus on them. The message is very clear. We have an issue that is critical for the future of this country and critical for the lives of so many innocent people. We cannot fail. Everyone who watched the debate on the Senate floor could not help but be struck by the speeches given for those of us who supported comprehensive immigration reform. Michael Bennett of Colorado. Bennett sounds like such a white bread name. Told the story of his grandparents who were Polish, displaced persons in World War II. A touching story. Bob Menendez, who got up and told the story of his family coming from Cuba and what it meant for them to be part of the United States. Marco Rubio, who didn't speak to any of the aspects of the bill, but talked about himself and his family, talked about their journey from Cuba and what they went through. And he said, you know, my parents were Americans long before they were citizens. Each one of these speeches meant so much to me because, you see, I'm a first-generation American too. My mother was an immigrant. She was the first dreamer in my life. She was brought here at the age of 2 from Lithuania. And the family landed in Baltimore and made it somehow to East St. Louis, Illinois, to meet up with some other Lithuanian immigrants. I went back to my mom's village in Lithuania. She never made it back, but I made it back. And I asked him, show me some things that were there in 1911 when she left. Oh, there's that Catholic church where she was baptized. Oh, and let me show you, this is the well where people drew water. See, the family must have drawn water from this well. And I looked at it and I thought about the night when my grandparents called the friends and relatives in and said to them, we're going to America. We hear there's some jobs over there. Grandpa's going first. If he gets a job, he's going to call for us. We're going to come. And I thought about what it must have been like when these relatives and friends left that house and walked back to where they lived. How one of them must have turned to the others and said, "Can you believe the Kutkaita family? Are they crazy? They're leaving that good house. They're leaving their church. They're leaving all their relatives and friends, their dog, their cat, their chickens, their garden. They're leaving all that behind to go to a place where they don't even speak the language. They'll be back." No, they never came back. That's my story. That's my family's story. That's your story. That's America's story. That's who we are. There's something in our DNA, maybe one generation, 2 generations removed, of the courage to pick up and move to come to this great country. And once here, to take that courage and to turn it into a stronger family and a brighter future. My friends at NALEO, this is our generation's chance. It doesn't come around very often. Let's make sure we work together, Democrats and Republicans, to make it a reality. Thank you.